write science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Most of my horror, I also run Local Memoirs Press, which also publishes horror. We do a annual Women in Horror anthology and or contest for Black horror fiction. So every February, in case you didn't know, is Women in Horror Month. And it's a month, it's ironic that it coincides with Black History Month as well. So my horror editor is Eden Royce, and she is a really good African-American horror writer. She's also my editor here at Local Memoirs Press. And we try to promote in women in horror. When we do this, we do it really well. So that's probably my contribution to this panel is that I publish horror, I promote women in horror, I also write horror.
Okay, well, I'm Valjeanne Jeffers. I write science fiction, horror, hard sci-fi, which is space operas, fantasy. My first series, the Immortal series, different readers, and I guess it's like that with a lot of books. Whatever reader reads it will come away with different impressions. Some come away feeling it's horror, others come away thinking it's fantasy. I'm also self-published, so I know quite a bit about, not as much as I'd like to know, but I know a little bit about self-publishing and marketing. So that's my contribution to it.
All right, so you want to talk about inspirations or what got us started in writing horror fiction?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
You want me to start?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How did I get started? I think because my Immortal series, which I never really thought of that series as a horror series. I kind of thought of it as a fantasy / science fiction. There were elements in there that of horror at some points, and then I always say, if you want to scare somebody, write what scares you. And there were a few times in the book when I actually scared myself, some scenes that I wrote. And Sumoko Salson, who I'm now friends with on Facebook, approached me and said that she wanted to include me, which just blew me away. She wanted to include me in 60 years of Black women in horror fiction. Because she said some of my readers, I was so flattered and honored beyond measure. She said some of my readers had approached her and said, you should include Valjeanne Jeffers' Immortal series. And that's how I wound up with 60 years of Black women in horror fiction. I mean, I think the Laurie Blue is in the book, you're in the book.
Yes.
The whole
Crystal.
So from that, I guess more of my association with more horror writers. I said, I should go ahead and try to do this. And then I had been introduced to steampunk, and I had written a story that had been published in steampunk. I said, I'm going to go ahead and do steampunk horror. And so that's what I did. And with my Mona Lisa series, that is the first time that I ever went out of my way to try to scare my readers. And from their responses, I think I did a pretty good job.
Yes. So I read a lot of Stephen King growing up. The Dark Tower series is probably my most favorite series ever. And it is truly horrific. If you have ever read any of the Dark Tower books, the level of horror in them, they're weird Western in a way, so I write weird Westerns too, but one man's quest and the things he loses is truly horrible, starting with his fingers on his gun hand, which is a little horrific. But I read a lot of Stephen King growing up. I'm a big fan of Shirley Jackson. I'm also a big fan of Flannery O'Connor's Southern Gothic type of horror. So my horror tends to be, when I write, it tends to be very localized. The setting is as much a character as the individual in the story. I think setting plays a major role in what makes things creepy, which makes things scary. Yay! Come on over now. Come on, Penelope. We're just talking about inspirations. And so for me, as a horror writer, it's not so much, I grew up in the 80s. It's not so much Jason and Freddy, but it's the things that look normal. It's the things that look ordinary, but somehow quite isn't, that creeps me out the most. And it's probably the most psychologically traumatizing thing. If you think about, my last name is Kurtz, so if you think about part of darkness, right? The horror, right? Of things falling apart, but that facade of it being normal. It's what's really the most terrifying pieces in horror for me. And when I write, that's usually what I tend to write about. What were some inspirations for you, Penelope?
I was a horror fan from little. I mean, me and my sisters would watch horror movies religiously. I mean, the horror stuff, and the Frankenstein, the Wolfman, you know, the vampires, creature feature that used to come on the weekends. You know, we would watch all that. I read Hitchcock, Ghost Book, anything, all horror stuff I used to read as a kid. Because I mean, that was, I don't know why we were so drawn to it, but all of my four sisters, all love horror. You know, and I guess maybe because the one thing about horror is that, unlike in the rest of the world, in the real world,
Yes.
monsters, you know what they look like. You know how it is to defeat them because it's always rules.
Yep.
So there's something that's very comforting about knowing that you can tell how to identify the monster and then how to kill it. In real life, it's not so easy.
Right, and then you guys have all seen that Scooby-Doo meme, right, where it says Scooby-Doo taught us that the real monsters were human beings, right? And I think I grew up in the 80s with the Atlanta child murder and like the rise of serial killers, super popular. And you're right, that world out there was unpredictable, it was very scary, it was not safe all the time. But when you watch Tales from the Crypt, you knew by the end of that what the rule. I mean, they made fun of that in one of those movies. In what's the one where they have the cabin in the woods? They talked about that trope where the virgin lives. There's always somebody who lives. There's always a girl at the end, and so you knew someone was going to survive at the end, no matter how many bodies piled up. Someone was going to survive. So there's that little drop of hope, right, at the end. There was a rule. But out in the real world, I grew up in a housing project. There was no guarantee that any of the guys I went to school with were going to survive past 21. And that was a really horrific statistic. And I found dead bodies in my neighborhood. You know, I've been witness to more than my share of knifings and knife play and fights with friends. That was a very horrific, real thing. So when I sat down and watched Fright Night, right, it's a very different experience. It was rules. It was, okay, I know that these things are going to happen, and if they take these steps, they're going to be fine. And there were no guarantees in my life, especially as a teenager, that was going to actually work out for me. And that was in and of itself a real world scare.
I was going to say, I was agreeing with you. I was going to jump in.
Yeah,
and
sure.
You said that when you talk about the knifings and the murders with serial killers, to me, one of the most unsettling things about them, and even some of the monsters that we see today in politics, okay, I'm going to leave it there. You know, I said, these people look so normal.
Yeah.
And so nice. You know, they just, you know, it's like the monsters, you want the monsters to carry a sign.
Yes.
Or some type of label.
Or something, but you, like you said, you never can recognize them. They're like an art is transformative. Art is taking something, and I've said this before, that's unmanageable, like the blues. You take something that's bad and that's horrible, and you put it in a form that you can manage, and even transform it into something beautiful.
Right. It's like what Mr. Young said this morning. Well, Milton was reading his words about Black science fiction, and his comment, one of the lines that struck me was, science fiction and Black science fiction isn't about the future, it's about our now. And I feel like horror is that very same way. It's not about so much what scares us in terms of like werewolves and the like, but it's the horror that we feel in the loss of control of our environment, of the things that we find safe. Like I remember one of the scariest things was that
shows that are logical. That's the type of horror I'm gonna like, where the supernatural touches on the natural, and where people do things that are logical, and that it's just out of your control.
And bad things still happen.
Exactly, bad things still happen, and it's just out of your control.
But I feel like that's something that as African Americans we can identify with. There's a lot of things that happen to us that are out of our control.
But there needs to be, for me personally, I can't speak for anybody else.
Sure.
And I get so mad with authors when they just kill off a character. How could you do that? Right.
It has to be, again, logic.
I could take the book and throw it across the room when they do
I've got on a purple shirt.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of places for that. For someone who also writes horror who might want to publish, is self-publishing the route to go, or?
Well, I run a publishing company.
Yes, that's
So we- and we promote a lot of horror because we like horror. But it is an option, obviously. I mean, we have, Smuka has that 60, and if you don't have that, you can, it's still on Amazon, isn't it?
Yeah, it's free, I think.
It's free on Amazon. So if you like Black women, you like horror, you want to see what kind of, there's 60 authors in that list. So there's no excuse for you to say, I can't find a Black woman author who writes horror. There's 60 in that list. And that's not even, she's always adding to that list.
Yeah,
too,
she
the
continues
more
to add
people
to
she
it.
finds. But definitely self-publishing is an option. Small presses are an option.
Yeah, Nicole runs a small press. I've self-published on my 9th book, 8th, 9th book, anyway. I decided to self-publish, and Nicole published my first switch. Yeah, and then I turned around and turned it into a full, because it was a novel then, and I turned it into a full novel. But the only thing about self-publishing is you have to do a lot of marketing yourself. You're gonna have to do a lot of marketing. Although I have heard, and I have a friend who was traditionally published, and I've heard some other people say that some of these traditionally published authors are not really doing much better than the self-published authors. And that if you're not really big, that they kind of just put you out there doing your own.
And they want you to have your own marketing plan.
You know, if you look at some submission guidelines, it's required before you submit to them that you have a marketing plan. And it has to be a detailed marketing plan. Sometimes they have a template in Word that they want you to complete. What book signings are you going to have? Like it can be a pretty significant. But even if you have an agent, 'cause I have several friends who are traditionally published as well, and who are New York Times bestsellers, and they are right across the hall from me at Con Carolina and selling their books just like I'm doing. And so it depends on who you know, how much effort and drive you have. You got to know yourself. And that's probably the biggest part about whether you decide to self-publish, small publish, or go a traditional route. You have to know you and how much work you're willing to put in. Because don't step out there thinking, okay, I can do this, and then don't, because you could do some damage to your professional reputation. There's a Facebook group called Open Call for Horror. You just go to Facebook, put in the search Open Call Horror. I'm on that in that group, and I'm in the one for science fiction, and they post open calls for horror.
Right. Heard about putting your books on Amazon, but when you read Amazon and you go to the categories, there's like 680,000 books. How do you not get lost in the shuffle of all those other 680,000
It's the marketing.
books?
You have your own
You build a
website.
following.
You have your own website, and you keep that website. You know, you make it look professional and pretty, and you send people, you put people, lead people towards it or drive people towards it. They go there, they check you out, and if they like what they see, they may buy your book right there on the site. Some people prefer to buy on Amazon. I don't have a problem with that. I'd rather they buy from me personally, but if they want to buy on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, I'm okay with that. Like I said, cons like this is these sorts of things like this.
Helps a lot.
It gets the word out.
Definitely build a following. But I have a newsletter. My Coach Mocha has a newsletter, but I also have a personal newsletter. And so when I have new releases or I'm in a new anthology, that group of people who sign up to get a newsletter for me get that information. So they don't have to sift through the 800 million people on Amazon or titles on Amazon. They know because Nicole put it here. I have a Facebook group for my work. Mocha Memoirs has a Facebook group. We have Twitter handles. We have Instagram pages. And so that people, when we flood, when our marketing person floods, when we have new releases, and so then they know. They don't have to sift through 8 million. They get, Memoirs has these 3 new titles out this quarter, and they go and they got them. Or they have a sale, and they do this, or what have you. And so that helps, but you generate that by going to things like this. You get people to sign up for your newsletter because you give them a discount. Things like that, you give out your card, you build a following in that manner. As long as you're always kind and professional and you got a good product, you'll be able to build a nice following, but it does take time.
Yeah, it
takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of nurturing. Social media presence is like growing plants. You gotta feed it, you gotta water it, you gotta give it some sunlight. But if you shut it in a room, it's not gonna grow. And so it's gotta nurture it.
So do you have a
Thank you so much for being here with us late tonight.